Bend the knee! D.B. Weiss and David Benioff are the executive producers behind the HBO television show Game of Thrones, based on the George R. R. Martin novel series A Song of Ice and Fire. And though the show is HBO's most commercially successful venture ever and one of its most critically acclaimed ever, it has taken some criticism from book fans and show fans alike for some of their creative decisions when adapting this beloved novel series. This is the case against Dan and Dave. So while there have been a great many things that Dan and Dave actually have gotten right, there have been quite a few missteps as well, and we're going to discuss those here. So one problem many book fans seem to have is the deviations from the book storyline. Some of them are small and can be overlooked, but some of them are massive and glaring. In Season 2, Daenerys' storyline went through some massive changes, most notably in Karth, and this had many people actually saying that her story was kind of boring throughout the second season. But the most notable change was the House of the Undying. That particular sequence had been changed so drastically that it pretty much bears no resemblance to its book counterpart, which to this day is still one of the most talked about chapters in all of A Song of Ice and Fire. Next up we have Sansa Stark, who in Season 5 had her storyline massively changed from the book plot. First she is given to the Boltons by Peter Baelish, then she's raped and tortured by Ramsay. After that, she escapes with Theon, finds her way to Castle Black, and then spends pretty much all of Season 6 whining about no one listening to her. And after Season 4, honestly speaking, that is not the Sansa that anyone wanted to see. And then there's the change that takes all the marbles. Everyone's favorite, Dorne. In Season 4, we got introduced to Prince Oberyn Martell, brilliantly played by Pedro Pascal. This had many fans with high hopes for what was to come in following seasons for the Dornish storyline. We got what seemed to be pretty good casting news for the characters. We heard about new sets. We heard about a bunch of fight choreography. We see pictures, featurettes with some of the new cast members, and that had us pretty excited for what was to possibly come. And then Season 5 hit. And oh, wow, what a train wreck. So first they send Jaime and Bronn down to Dorne to rescue Myrcella from the Martells after Cersei receives a veiled threat with Myrcella's necklace in the jaws of a viper. What proceeded to follow will go down as one of the most wasted storylines to ever be adapted from any medium to television, period, point blank. The fan reaction was so bad that in fact, Dan and Dave actually made further changes to the Dorne storyline and basically eliminated Dorne from the show almost entirely. So not only did we not get to see the Dornish master plan at work, we also didn't get to see Arya Hota do any actual fighting, and that is probably the biggest shame of all. Aside from those changes, we also got a number of either logical inconsistencies or just great leaps in logic that have people scratching their heads. Towards the middle of Season 5, we get a scene with Ramsay Bolton apparently taking 20 men, sneaking into Stannis Baratheon's camp and destroying all of his supplies. And this forces Stannis to burn Shireen in order to receive favor from the Lord of Light in order to be able to win his battle against the Boltons. But unfortunately, Stannis is not Azor Ahai, which means he does not win the battle, which means he burned his daughter for nothing. And later on, we get one of the biggest leaps in logic during Season 6, and that is Arya surviving a multiple stabbing by the waif. Because other characters had died from only one stab wound earlier in the season, and also because of the way that the scene seemed to play out with Arya brazenly walking the streets of Braavos looking for passage back to Westeros while she was being hunted by the Faceless Men. This actually led some people to believe that this was all a dream sequence and that Arya would wake up in her bed fearing a possible attack from the Faceless Men. And let's not forget the Terminator 2-like chase sequence throughout the streets of Braavos, in which the waif decided, instead of doing a stealth assassin attack like you would expect a Faceless Man to do, she decides to openly attack Arya on the streets of Braavos and attempt to kill her in front of hundreds or possibly thousands of people. Another thing book fans in particular seem to take issue with is cutting of certain key characters out of the storyline, as well as changing other storylines completely. In Season 3, we get introduced to the character known as Locke, who for some reason was made up for the show instead of the inclusion of the Brave Companions. For those of you who haven't read the books, the Brave Companions are a sellsword company from Essos who are embroiled in a number of storylines that take place at Harrenhal. They were also responsible for cutting off Jaime Lannister's hand and putting Brienne into that bear pit. And though not including them didn't significantly change any events, it seems kind of weird that they actually decided to make a new character instead of just including the Brave Companions. After taking the time to introduce us to some of the Dornish houses, or at least their sigils, in the beginning of Season 4, by the time we get to Season 5, there are absolutely no other Dornish houses mentioned, and then after the coup staged by Ellaria and the Sand Snakes, there are no other Dornish houses that rise up against them after they have killed the rightful leaders of Dorne. And this has been pointed out by many in the fandom as a great inconsistency when it comes to inheritance rights for bastards as well as lines of succession for other noble houses. The one character that across the board many people seem to have issue with not being included in the show is Lady Stoneheart. Now, for those of you who haven't read the books and have absolutely no idea who Lady Stoneheart is, she's pretty much a zombified version of Catelyn Stark. And currently she is leading the Brotherhood Without Banners and is seeking to gain vengeance on anyone who was involved with the Red Wedding. With this being a fantasy series, this is one of the key fantasy elements that George put into the books that seems to have been minimalized in the show. Another knock against Dan and Dave happens to be dialogue. Specifically, when they decide that they want to be a little more humorous than they probably actually should be. Case in point, at the end of Season 5, when Jaime and Bronn are leaving to go back to King's Landing with Princess Myrcella and Prince Trystane, we get one of the most infamous bad lines in all of television history.
You want a good girl, but you need a bad pussy.
If I had hands, I would facepalm so hard right now. Not to mention the ass finger scene, as well as the absolutely horrible filler scenes between Grey Worm, Tyrion, and Missandei. Speaking of Grey Worm and Missandei, along with Bronn, Ollie, and the Waif, many fans felt as though these are characters, along with some others, whose storylines were overblown and could have been used to greater effect in order to develop some of the more major plot lines in the story, instead of providing minor characters with a platform that seemed to serve no purpose other than filler. And with only 10 episodes per season, there should be as little filler as possible. Another area which many people have pointed out is the passage of time. We have absolutely no idea sometimes how long things have taken to happen, and especially when it comes to people traveling from place to place. This has actually led people to create an ongoing joke about Peter Baelish having a teleporter that he lends out to people in order to get them from place to place in the shortest amount of time possible. This seems like something that could be an easy fix where all you would have to do is just, in a couple of throwaway lines, talk about how long it's taken someone to travel from one part of Westeros to another part. Going back to book items that seem to be left out of the show, there are a number of different horns which are mentioned that have magical properties. The two most famous happen to be a Dragonbinder horn, which Euron happens to have, which he says can control dragons, and another one which is called the Horn of Jormungand, which is a legendary horn from a wildling king beyond the wall named Jormungand, which is said to possibly be able to bring down the wall. And I don't know exactly how this happened, but Dan and Dave have stated that there are only 10 Valyrian steel swords in all of Westeros. I want you guys to let that sink in for a second. In the books, there happen to be over 200 Valyrian steel swords. Now, in the books, they don't mention that the swords can actually kill White Walkers, but in the show, they can. But the fact that they went from 200 to 10, I don't even have any more to say about that. And the last item I'm going to touch on today is the character assassinations that have taken place during this series. The big one that a lot of book fans have complained about is Stannis Baratheon. I mean, in season 5, this guy totally lost it. He acted nothing like he would in the books, making all kinds of moves that he never would have done. For one, tricking Davos to leave so that he could burn Shireen is something that Stannis would have never done in the books, because he wants everyone to know what kind of person he is, and he doesn't go around deceiving people. When he gives an order about something, you gotta accept it, period, point blank, and if you don't like it, then you can join on the pyre with whoever's gonna burn. We also have Loras Tyrell. The character of Loras Tyrell in the show departs greatly from his book counterpart. In the books, Loras happens to be one of the greatest fighters living in Westeros at this particular time. But in the show, not only does he not seem like a great fighter, he's way more of a mirror reflection of Renly Baratheon in the show than he is any likeness to his book counterpart. Also, Peter Baelish. Now, Peter Baelish doesn't stray ridiculously far from the books with his plans, but his execution when it comes to certain things is absolutely un-Baelish-like. For example, in the books, when he has his run-in with Lysa and pushes her out the moon door, there's a singer there named Marillion who he blames for Lysa's death. While in the show, that character was killed off during season 1 and doesn't appear in the Vale storyline whatsoever. There's also the Blackfish, who totally betrays the house words of the Tullys and decides to go on a suicide mission instead of helping Sansa get back Winterfell from the Boltons. Doran Martell was absolutely wasted the entire time that he was on screen. Alexander Siddig is such a great actor, and I can't believe they cast him to do absolutely nothing with him. In the books, we find out that Doran Martell is a big schemer, and he is looking for a way to get back at the Lannisters and the Baratheons for the murder of his sister, niece, and nephew, and also pretty much kind of the fall of the Targaryen dynasty. Because remember, the current Dornish ruling family actually happened to be descended from Targaryens as well. But in the show, Dorne is made to look weak, ineffectual, and absolutely inept at ruling. And honestly speaking, I have absolutely no idea why they included this character if they weren't going to make him anything like his book counterpart. Speaking of another Dornish character that is nothing like their book counterpart, we have Ellaria Sand. In the books, Ellaria Sand travels back to Dorne after the death of Oberyn Martell. She gathers up her kids, which are the 4 youngest Sand Snakes, and is pretty much like, hey, you know what, I'm done, too much war, too much death, I'm out of here. But for some reason they decided to make her kind of the Dornish spirit of vengeance, and She goes on this crusade now to rid Dorne of everything that she feels is wrong with it, starting from Marcella Baratheon to Trystane, and also Doran Martell and Ariel Hota, and anyone else who might possibly be loyal to Doran. And as stated earlier, it makes absolutely no sense that she and the Sand Snakes were able to assassinate the leadership of Dorne and have absolutely no reprisal from any other families in Dorne. Plus, how can you get revenge for Oberyn by killing his brother and his nephew? Taking it to the opposite end of Westeros, we're going to talk about the Northern Lords. Now, while they proclaimed Jon as king in the north at the end of season 6, the one thing that caught the ire of many was the fact that the Northern Lords happen to all look like a bunch of cowards. Earlier in the season, Sansa mentions to Davos how fiercely loyal the Northern Lords are to the Starks. And unfortunately, we saw absolutely none of that. It's only after Jon and Sansa are able to defeat the Boltons do the rest of the northern houses decide to stand with the Starks as they had done for hundreds and thousands of years. The Glovers, the Manderleys, and the Serwins especially were all three made to look like a bunch of cheap, petty lords with absolutely no loyalty to their liege, and man, I just can't believe that they would actually do this to such honorable men. And then there happens to be the biggest betrayal of them all, and that is the Umbers. Small John Umber decides to roll with the Boltons instead of sticking by the Starks. In the books, the Umbers are the Starks' #1 bannermen, and the Great John is actually the first one to call Robb king in the north. So the fact that the small John Umber decided to be such a damn turncloak is absolutely heartbreaking. And that leads me to the last part of this whole character assassination thing, and that is the literal assassination of the direwolves. While I understand that the CGI budget is a major concern for the show and they want to make sure that they don't go over budget, man, they absolutely destroyed everything that we loved about the direwolves. First, Nymeria should have been part of Arya's storyline in Bravos, because this is where Arya learns about her warging abilities when she has wolf dreams. But apparently they decided to make the only warg for the Starks Bran. Next up, we get the death of Summer, which is Bran's direwolf. He got killed in the cave, stabbed to death by whites, instead of running and protecting Bran, which is the thing that he probably would have done, instead of deciding to just jump into the middle of a group of whites to be stabbed to death. Also, we cannot forget the absolutely tragic off-screen death of Shaggy Dog. He was the one direwolf that everyone was hoping we would get to see a Stark ride into battle on and do something absolutely awesome. But alas, this is something we will never get to see. Rest in peace, direwolves. You will be missed. And while he's not dead, Ghost might as well be, because who knows when's the next time we're actually going to see him on screen in any significant way possible. And just to be clear here, just because I have pointed out these things that many people see as flaws doesn't mean that you should stop watching the show, and doesn't mean that I think that the show actually hasn't put forth something that is very phenomenal. However, I did feel that it was my job to point out certain places where the executive producers have actually made some terrible errors in judgment. You guys let me know what you think about this one. And I will be back again pretty soon, hopefully, with another video, barring any technical difficulties. Anyway, you guys already know the deal. Rate, comment, subscribe, share, tell your friends, and come back for more. That's been my time. This is Don Raven saying Valar dohaeris.